Okay, so today, seasonal yoga, teaching according to the seasons, and just some basic kind of tips, sequencing, just adding it all to your toolbox. You've got the tools, it's just giving you a little bit more inspiration. So looking at teaching yoga, so I've written a little thing for you, and I'm going to put it into your group, but it's really about like kind of a bit like the ethics of it, which you guys are aware of, but I just to go over it a little bit. So first steps: mindfulness, humility, and boundaries. So practice mindfulness while teaching. So continue. So when you're teaching, always continue to return your awareness to your own breath, your own energy and expression. Sometimes we get caught up with other people's energy or our own thoughts. So continue to come back into your own breath when you're teaching. I always, when I teach in segments, as you know. After almost every segment, I get everyone else to get you to check in with your own energy, your own breath. But that's also a way as a teacher for you to check in with yourself and be grounded and aware so that you can hold the space. So being grounded in your body is important as well, being humble, honest, transparent. If somebody asks you a question, if you don't know, tell them you don't know. You don't need to bullshit. I've seen so many people making up stuff, or you can tell the more they go on, you're like, wait a minute, you don't really know. Just say, I don't know, but I can find out for you. You've got the LKY yoga teachers and trainees group as well. And there's a lot of teachers in there too. So everyone's really supportive. So I remember having the first time someone came to me and asked me about breast cancer and recovery from breast cancer, because they had a student, their wife was recovering from it, and it was one of my male students. And I was honest, and I said, I've actually never taught anyone who's recovering from breast cancer who's had a mastectomy, so I will look into it. So I spoke to my peers, people that I trained with, and teachers that I knew, and got as much information as I could and gave it back to them. I think you're more respected if you actually put your hands up and say, do you know what? I don't know. And that's when you go down the rabbit hole and you learn so much. I learned a lot about fibromyalgia a few years ago because I had so many one-to-one students coming to me with fibromyalgia, and I'd never heard of it in my life. So in order to teach it, in order to help support them, I bought books on it, I read about it, I spoke to my peers, and I know a lot about fibromyalgia now, and how to teach it, and the benefits. Yoga, to see the difference in these people after practicing yoga. So the things that you sometimes don't know so much about, when people come to you with them, that's when you really learn. Okay, so endeavor to truly see your students, honoring their wholeness, respecting their individuality, allowing them to have their own experience. It's like we all feel things differently in our bodies. So creating healthy boundaries as well, between teacher and student, and this is something that I learned. One of the trainings, and Angela was actually on the training with me, and I've always been someone who thinks that all humans are equal, but in a training perspective, when I was training people, I was teaching them as if I was their equal, and so there wasn't that healthy boundary in the sense. So there was a bit of a lack of respect, and I have to own that, and the fact that I didn't keep that healthy, that boundary of being really like more of the grown up, and being and actually holding the space in a different way. So and that was a big learning curve, in the sense that now, since I've gone into more training, some of you sometimes end up, and it'll be the same with you guys, with teaching friends. So I've had friends who just decided to join my trainings, and I'll always say to them before the trainings, don't take it personally that I'm not going to be so personal, I'm still going to be friendly and open, but it's a different boundary that you set. I'm going to be your friend outside the room. I'm your teacher trainer inside the room. So it's the same when you're your yoga teacher as well. And when you're in that space, you're holding everyone's space. And, you know, when you do the brunch clubs, the supper clubs and stuff like that, yeah, after you've taught, you're still holding space in a sense, but you're back to, you are more yourself as well. And you can be that little bit, but it's just checking in to make sure you're not, you have to have that, retain that professional integrity. And, you know, it's better to step up and do that as opposed to learn the hard way. You know, part of my natal chart. So yeah, it's all about squares. So refrain from giving advice in psychotherapy or any other areas outside your teaching expertise. That's another thing that I learned as well. You as a teacher, not necessarily as a teacher trainer, now a teacher trainer, I really will set these boundaries. I used to have yoga students messaging me with their personal problems or ailments and stuff like that. And it's very much, you're there to hold space, and if it's not as relevant to for me with teacher trainers, if it's not relevant to their teachings or to their personal practice, it's really not it's not about me going, oh no, I'm not interested, go away. If you're somebody's doing a course with you, things will be coming up and they do need support. But we're not trained psychotherapists, unless you are a trained psychotherapist, yeah. And but it's about learning to, you know, acknowledge a stare. You don't want people stealing your time, and you'll find that because I never knew, I really wanted to be liked, you know, and I didn't like to say no. And I found that I was giving so much energy to students who wouldn't necessarily care what was going on in my personal life or anything going on for me, and I wouldn't going to share it because I wasn't their friend, I was their teacher. But so you'll use your intuition in that sense, and there's always people you can recommend. I've got friends that are psychiatrists, psychotherapists, osteos, you can, like, you know, say, right, well, I'm not so sure about this, but have you thought about doing this? And you don't have to take on other people's problems. I used to be taking on so many people's problems that actually my teenage daughters thought I didn't care about them, you know, and that's been a bit learning curve as well, because I was too busy looking after so many other people that I wasn't looking after myself and others. That's so important to you as a teacher, okay? So there's also, you want to protect the quiet of Shavasana, ending the class on time and requesting beforehand that those do need to leave early, leave before Shavasana begins. I don't think you need to tell them that right at the beginning of the class, because that actually it's a bit like when I tell people about teaching teenagers. You give them the option, they'll take the option. How many people are going to go, oh yeah, okay, I'm just going to leave before Shavasana, then it gives me an extra 5 minutes to do stuff? No. So if somebody says they have to leave, that's fine. But just like holding the space, making sure you're not running over. You know, some teachers like coming all woo, and then they run over, and that's disrespect. That's a stare as well. That's stealing people's time. They maybe have money on their car, or they need to go and pick up their kids. So making sure your timings are good. So also personal practice and your knowledge of teachings. So to be a good teacher, it requires prioritizing your personal practice and your self-studies. You know, it goes without saying. So always remain a student, be curious and intent on improvement. Solicit feedback, invite an awareness of personal weaknesses and mistakes. Enthusiastically embrace professional development. There's always more to learn. So notice the difference between naive practice, a form of repetition, and purposeful or deliberate teaching practice, which specifically builds on strengths and improves weaknesses. So teach only what you know and have embodied. Don't try and teach what you don't know, and don't try and teach what you're in the process of learning. You know, just for a experience. Oh, I'm learning this. I'm going to share this with my students. Make sure you feel it. It feels okay in your body first. And And again, be prepared to refer students to other experts for topics beyond your capabilities. You know, before I was a pregnancy yoga teacher, if I had someone coming to me specifically for pregnancy yoga, I wouldn't pretend that I was a pregnancy yoga teacher. I would refer them out to local pregnancy yoga teachers. So look at what they're after, and if you can't, you can refer. So skillful teaching, it doesn't sacrifice the basics in favor of complexity or uniqueness. So this includes embracing repetition. You know, people sometimes feel more comfortable with if there's a structure. So I sometimes have like a skeletal class in the sense that people know my teaching style. So they know, okay, there's going to be a different asanas or different pranayama, but they know kind of where they're at. It's not every, you know, sometimes I'll go, oh, Yindalini or Kundalini flow, but I've got different styles that my students are aware of now. So yeah, you don't have to throw in all the cool shapes, as you know. So with asana, a skilled teacher acknowledges the need for balance of effort and ease, strength and openness. A skilled teacher invites challenge while making teachings accessible. So you want to build tapas in the body, but also you don't want to fear the newcomers or people who aren't so flexible, because they need to know that that's not what yoga is all about as well. But people want to feel like they've done something as well. They're not there to check out. Okay, so know your asana sequence in your body before teaching it. So this is going to help you to teach it more effectively. So feel it in your body before you teach it. I think that's quite important. So an excellent teacher allows pauses in teachings for students to process and go inwards, and watching to see if the teaching has been assimilated before giving an instruction. So they reach their potential. Teachers reach their potential by uncovering their authentic voice. Excellent teachers adapt or change a class plan to effectively respond to a particular situation. So it's like, usually it used to be, you know, when I used to teach so many classes a week, and it would be, you'd have like on the Monday, you'd have that class plan, and you'd have it for the rest of the week in other different places. But then you'll find, wait a minute, I've got a student that's coming to all my classes. They don't want to do a repetition of the exact same class. So you have to go, oh, they want a bit more. You have to adapt. And it's the same with you have an idea of what you want to give them, but then the energy of the day just doesn't feel right. Or, you know, sometimes if it's a really windy day, that's like really like vata. You need to like bring the vata down. So it's very much like, and sometimes the dynamics of the class might not suit the class plan that you originally intended, so you can adapt. So be prepared to adapt the asana, adapt the pranayama. You can still have that kind of skeletal idea of what you want to achieve. So teachers, they don't spout all they know about a topic, but they teach based on what they see in students. So in some ways, it's almost like you can, while you're in the postures, you can eventually you find your flow and you can share things. And sometimes if people aren't ready to hear it, they won't hear it. You're not throwing things down their throat. It's just being aware of the times when you have to be silent to allow them to integrate, and times when you can put something in there that it might actually resonate, or it might open up something within. So you want to individualize teachings for various students' needs. Sometimes I find that moving, to really get people to connect in with their breath, doing the dynamic version of the asana first before you come into the static version, and then they'll really be able to hold in that pose or reach the full potential of it. So I've got so much I want to share today. I don't want to waste your time either. So you want to promote student safety. So you guys, I'm very aware, you want to undertake specialized study before teaching children, before teaching pregnancy, or students with medical or chronic conditions. You're not going to wing it. I don't think it's, there's a lot of 200-hour teachers out there that are teaching children's yoga and teen yoga, and those of you who have done the courses will know there's actually a huge difference. There's things that you, contraindications that you need to know. Same with pregnancy as well. So you want to provide variations, alternatives. What I do when I'm teaching is, if you've got a mix, my Tory class, as you know, a huge mix of different types of people. So when I teach, I will give the easiest version. So I've got some people who are, maybe they're quite new, but they're just really not in their bodies. So there'll be like so many people just can whip their legs around into Gomukhasana, get their leg to lift over that leg, and they don't have to go into full expression. But some people can't even do that. So as you're aware, there's some people who are really struggling with the physical aspect of the body, then you can say, you can take your right foot to the front of your left shin. And actually, you can think, oh God, that's not very far, but that is a lot for some people. Just sitting on the floor is a lot for some people. And then you can say, alternatively, lift your foot over and take it over the bent knee. You can stay there, or take it to the full expression, feet at either side, making sure you're not sitting on your ankles and protecting your knees. So any posture you're going into, start with the lowest modification, give them the options, so that if you've got, because I've got some advanced yogis in that class, and then I've got some far less advanced yogis, but they're less advanced asana wise, because there's no such thing as being, there's people that think they're spiritually superior. Everyone's on their path, everyone's learning, and we're all at different stages in evolvement and in lifetimes as well. So giving the modifications and working it up. So the people that really want to work can work, and the people who there'll be people there who aren't going to be sitting beating themselves up because you've given them an option, and then get them to all come back into their breath. So they're all practicing together, but in all very different ways. It's quite challenging, but it's good fun to teach a real big mix, a general public class. So, if a class is too large to provide individual attention, don't avoid risky or complex postures. You're not going to be teaching headstands, for example, to a class of 25 people, because there is too much risk going on. You can't make sure everyone's neck's fine. So utilize safe sequencing. I'm going to share that into the group with you. They're just what counter poses to do for each pose. Most of you guys are aware of that, but if you're not, that's okay as well. So I'm going to share that with you as well. Put that into your Facebook group. So so you want to just be acknowledging of your students. So give them a wee smile when you're teaching. You make sure they've noticed you. Make sure you look around the room and acknowledge your students and acknowledge the effort that they're making. So so I think I've got so much stuff, and some of this is very much about I'm just going to leave it out there with that there. It's like teaching skills. I'll put that into your group, and it's just like handy reminders to get you going. So we're going to speak about cueing now as well. So bear with me, because I've not been able to print off some of this stuff because the problem with my computer. So I'm still reading some of the stuff off of here. So cueing. So the primary point about alignment is better thought of in terms of the individual student than in terms of a pose. As I always reiterate, it's about function as opposed to form. So no alignment teaching will work for all students, because all students are different. So it's something of an exercise in futility to attempt to provide generally useful cues, but teachers do need to learn and teach some cues. But it's vital that we understand the inherent limitations in these cues, and we commit to continuous study and practice and observation of poses and cues, and the patterns among your students, and how to respond to various injuries and conditions, because you'll always have somebody with an injury of some sort or something going on for them in every class. And that's how you learn as well. So the evolution of a teacher is due in part to learning to effectively apply this endless study, practice, and observation to each of the individual situations that arrive, okay? So let's look at some common cues for when you're teaching. Bear with me because I have to scroll down here. So many verbal cues in asana teaching are used widely by many teachers in many situations, but occasionally such a cue turns out to be misunderstood, or it simply doesn't widely apply. Most of the time, there are good reasons that a cue comes to be used often. So even with good solid cues that work much of the time, they won't always be applicable, easy for me to say. So individual bodies, not just outer body shapes, but skeletal structures. So some of you guys have trained with me in the yin. We're aware of compression. Instead, sometimes it's not muscular. Sometimes we can only open our bodies so far because of our bone structure. Okay, so the purpose of practicing asana is not to look a certain way in a pose, but it's to promote health and well-being. So the optimal way to practice asanas will naturally vary amongst all individuals. So here's an example of a cue that can be useful in some cases, but it might be over-applied or misapplied. So how you consider how students of different experience levels may apply the following cue in Warrior 2 versus Warrior 1 pose. Move your shoulder blades down your back. Have you heard that one before? Probably. So the move your shoulder blades down your back, because sometimes can actually contribute to some people's shoulder issues. So when the upper arms are lifted higher than the shoulders, and the shoulder blades naturally elevate and they upwardly rotate. So when they're not allowed to do this, the shoulder joint gets pinched and the front ribs must either thrust forwards or the arms widen into a V shape. So if you can shrug your shoulder blades up your back, so allowing your shoulder blades to scoot up your back can be quite therapeutic. But you can encourage your students to shrug their shoulder blades up their backs when their arms lift. So if that action crunches the neck, then they can lift up more through the crown of the head while keeping the chin slightly tucked. So different cues like that, but you can choose different types of cues as well. So alignment cueing can be delivered in so many different ways. So used to be sometimes you could cue alignment by going around and adjusting a class. Nowadays, because of the COVID situation, I don't really tend to, I've never, even before COVID, I wasn't a huge adjuster because I didn't like to disturb other people's energy field because I work with energy. But anatomical cues can be highly useful and effective. So I really tended to, before the COVID situation as well, instead of going around and adjusting people, I like to articulate how to get yourself in that pose so they can feel it in their own bodies. So you want your students to make subtle adjustments in the pose to help inform them of where their body is in space. So you don't want to speak solely in anatomical terms, because most students don't have an extensive background in anatomy. You know, have you ever been in a class with a student where a teacher's kind of basically showing off their anatomy stuff, and you're like, "What? Put your what there? What where?" I sometimes find it is interesting. I do like when people use some anatomical terms because you can learn as well, or it can it's professional, but not too much. Because when a student hears a cue that they don't understand, they get stuck in their head trying to process it as well. So instead of accessing the feeling body, they get stuck in the thinking mind. And we don't want that. We want to come out your head and into your heart. So sometimes you can ask them to move into asana with their eyes closed so they can access the feeling state versus relying on their external senses only. So those of us who practice and teach yoga are like the blind men in the fable who describe the elephant in a different way, depending on which part of the animal they're touching. So none of us are wrong, exactly. Indeed, all of us have a firm grasp on some part of the truth, but no single teacher can wrap their arms around the whole practice or perceive the whole truth within each and every student. So in a sense, this is what makes yoga an exciting and a dynamic art. And so it's not a finite or fully graspable science. So the most masterful teachers are the ones who can speak the language of sensation most clearly and vividly. So a really effective way to facilitate alignment is to connect the movements of the breath to the movements within a pose. So so as I said, working with the alignment of, so working with it, moving in and out of a pose, doing the dynamic before you move into the static. So let's look at cueing standing poses. So, because there's so many different ones. So let's look at it. Let's look at some of these ones. So placing the feet parallel. Okay. So you can tell them to place their feet parallel. It can help to remind yourself of the purpose of each and every cue, but the purpose is to align the hips in a neutral position so that the leg bones are coming from the hips are also neutral. As you learn with nearly every cue, the parallel alignment of the feet doesn't always help each student to meet the actual objective. So before you go into it, as I say, it's about the function of the pose. What do you want to achieve? So our bones and our joints are shaped differently from those of other individuals. So while your hip socket may face straight out to the side, the hip socket of the yogi next to you, it may face more forwards. So this difference in orientation changes the way your femur descends from your pelvis. So consider this: if your hip socket faces more directly to the side, your feet may naturally want to turn out when the femur is in a neutral position in the socket. So when the person does that and they make their feet parallel, they may look neat and tidy, but they're internally rotating at the hip to accommodate that position. So I've got one of my teachers that trained with you, Angela, Michelle. Her warrior one, she used to say, "Oh, I'm doing it wrong. And it wasn't. It was just her skeletal system. So normally if you're in warrior one, normally it would be heel to heel, your hips are square. If she did that, she really didn't feel right. She didn't feel stable. So she needed to open up and have her feet either kind of like it was on a railway track. And that's where she felt stable and secure. Now, if we try to make it look nice, like from the Iyengar perspective, yes, it looked nice, but did she feel comfortable, solid, stable? No. So look at what you're wanting to create, and everyone's bodies are different. So so there's always at least one additional factor contributing to the individuality of each body's skeleton. So a thigh or a shin bone may twist. If a shin bone twists outwards from the knee to the ankle, then the feet may naturally turn out as a result. So when pointing out issues and problems, we take great care to also offer considerations and solutions. Okay, Nadine, one of my teachers as well, and she's a really, really, really flexible person because she was a dancer before, and she'd been beating herself up for so long because she can't get her heels down in downward facing dog. But when I started teaching her about bone compression and the muscular system, she discovered that her ankle bones, there was bone compression. It was as far as her ankle joints could go. The reason so my bone compression in my hips, I can't fully open into Baddha Konasana because of bone compression. But why can I put my feet into, why can I go into half lotus? Well, it's because my ankle joints are really, really flexible. So I used to think, well, what's going on here? Why can I do that? So look, every student's going to be different. Some people, they might not have open hips, but they can do something because of that. You've got every joint. If you've ever watched the Paul Grilly anatomy stuff, that's where you really start learning. Paul Grilly and anatomy is you if you've done the 200 hours with me, or you're doing the 200 hours, you'll be doing Paul Grilly. He's amazing, and that's when you can really open up in your own body. So if you figure out if you're doing something when you're getting them to put their face their knees forward and get the standing in mountain pose and facing the knees forward, and when you do that, what does the feet do? This is going to give you a good sense of how the feet should be placed to obtain neutral hip and leg alignment. So instead of getting people to put their feet parallel, get them to have their knees facing forward, and that is where they're at in that sense. So in order to make this observation and accurate assessment, the arches of the feet need to be lifted and the legs engaged, because a collapsed inner arch or a weak hip stabilizer could cause your knees to drop downwards towards each other. Okay, so you want to engage the legs and lift up the arches here. So here's another problem, hip width apart. Okay, so we're speaking about, so they might not be clear about the cue, hip width apart. You might want to clarify that the distance isn't based on the flesh of the hips. It's the distance between the two hip bones. So you can get your students to place their fingers on these bones and place the heels of their feet between the hip bones. Here's another one, square your hips. And I know that I say these ones as well, so don't worry, it's like, so another cue that might not be crystal clear to some students is square your hips. So I sometimes do say, get your hips facing forwards, because square your hips, what? So when the cue square your hips is used with a pose like crescent lunge or warrior one, it might be problematic because the legs are doing different things. So the two sides of the pelvis might be different. So you can instead say square the chest towards the front of the room. Okay, so squaring the hips is referring to the two big hip bones that you can feel with your hands. And to have them square means they're in the same plane, both horizontally and vertically. So to put it another way, you don't want one hip to be higher or lower, in front of or behind the other. So a great way to visualize this is to look at the front of your mat, which is a straight line. Are your hips parallel to the top of your mat? Are they even with each other in height? Then your hips are square. Okay, so it's just a handy little tips to just work with cues and alignment. So when your legs are doing different things, the two sides of the pelvis should also be doing two different things, which means they're not quite squared towards the front of the room or even level. Okay, so when you teach a pose like crescent moon with the crescent lunge with the right leg forward, instead of saying square the hips towards the front of the room, you can say square the chest towards the front of the room. And then you can add that the right side of the pelvis, as it moves into a slight posterior tilt, is higher and further forward, while the left side of the pelvis is lower and further back in a slight anterior tilt. So so that's helpful. So the knee in bent knee, in any sort of bent knee pose. So aligning the knee over the second toe. So the kneecap is not always a good indicator of where the thigh bone is aligned in bent knee poses such as warrior two. I find it quite a good cue to get people to really open up the hips a little bit in warrior two, is to get your knee working towards your pinky toe. So it starts to, there we go. So There are many potential reasons that a knee isn't tracking. So you've got the pelvis, you've got the femoral torsion, you've got tibial torsion, ankle and foot structure, ligament laxity, your quadriceps may be weak. You've got so many, and you've got habitual patterning. So instructing a student to align the knee over the second toe will not address any big problems, and they may cause more issues. So when we see that the knee is not aligned with the foot, avoid correcting the student before conducting a deeper inquiry. So turning the knee towards the pinky toe as much as you can while staying rooted through the base of the big toe and hugging the inner ankles in. Yeah, I do find that that's, some of you guys have been in my classes when you've done it. It does kind of change things a little bit, moving the knee towards the pinky toe. So, so just like little cueing it's really helpful. So the kneecap can be a bit of a fibber, okay? So there can be up to about 50-degree discrepancy between the direction the thigh bone is moving and the direction in which the patella is pointing. Patella is the kneecap. So to get the thigh bone aligned, you might need to feel as though you're turning the knee towards the pinky toe. So how vigorously should you work to track the knee outwards? So as much as you can while staying rooted or reaching through the base of the big toe and hugging the inner ankles in. If the foot is working in this way and the thigh bone itself is pointing over the center of the foot, it doesn't even matter if the knee goes past the ankle, okay? So ask questions. Is there pain? Is the foot pronating? Does the student have a history of arthritis or other knee pathologies? Do they have a large Q angle observable when they're standing? So, you know, it could be muscular weakness or anatomical structure. So correcting someone without understanding why they're presenting a particular alignment may lead to more problems than the student currently has. So it's okay for many students to have the knees pointing inside the foot in Warrior 2, okay? So going deeper, so when inward and outward moving knees have a correctable cause, you know, it can be as simple as stopping the pronation or supination of the feet. So a lack of hip strength sometimes can be the cause for feet pronating or supinating, okay? So strengthening the hip muscles naturally leads to greater control over placement in legs and standing poses. So when the cause is muscular imbalance or issues with the motor control, strength training is good. And you can re-educate the muscles both around the knee and the hip. And that's going to improve knee tracking as well. So strength and technique are needed so the desired movements become habitual. So what about another one? Spiral your inner thighs. So picture your thighs as two big cylinders attached to the tops of the hip joints. And to follow this cue, turn your thighs inward, starting at the hip joint. So picture the cylinders rotating towards each other. And you'd feel like this is pulling the meat of your inner thighs back from each other. And it alters your posture in standing poses and in downward dog, making you feel more engaged and supported through your pelvis and your lower back. So let's look at a little summary. So in standing poses, cueing, you can find the hip bones of the fingers and place the heels beneath the bones. Squaring chest to the front of the room is another one. Distribute the feet evenly across all four corners of the feet. To get even weight distribution in your feet, a cue might be shift your weight forwards or keep the weight in the heels. So Paschimottanasana, I quite like to get my students to bring awareness to get some weight into their heels. Otherwise, they're tipping forwards and they're scared that they're going to fall forwards. So engaging the muscles around the knee to avoid hyperextension. You can move the bent knee towards the pinky toe side of the foot as much as possible. And stay, but while you're doing that, you can stay rooted through the base of the big toe. Okay, so that is cueing some standing poses. So let's look at cueing the spine. So we're going to look at the spine, like when you're looking at the function or the poses. I always do it from where the spine is coming from first. So let's look at the first one. Tuck or scoop in the tailbone. So in some styles of yoga, the cues, tuck your tailbone and scoop your tailbone, were common. And over time, teachers with anatomy expertise observed that such cues are being overused, and they began to advise more awareness and caution. In a person with good posture and a normal lumbar curve, the pelvis and sacrum will be slightly tipped forwards in the legs in anteversion. So the intention of this cue is typically given to teachers to help students avoiding overarching in the lower back. So technically, the cue is designed to bring about retroversion of the pelvis relative to the femur bones. So for hyperlordosis, for students who are not demonstrating hyperlordosis, so this is an exaggerated lower back curve, the cue is unlikely to be called for or useful. So for students with hyperlordosis, teachers may need a verbal cue to help students, but the cue, scoop the tailbone, has many potential issues and cautions. So this cue can be interpreted in different ways. The majority of students will be displaying a tucked pelvis due to excessive sitting. And there's a lot of people that sit a lot because we're stuck in the office or whatever. So a student can be overarching and they can tuck the pelvis at the same time as well. And tucking the tailbone also can make it harder to engage your core muscles, which means your back's not protected. So so this tuck your tailbone is pretty, it's quite, it can be quite confusing, and it might be not so effective. It might lead to overwork and injury. So the idea that a tucked pelvis is good for you comes from ballet. So tucked pelvis is necessary for a ballerina to perform her craft, but it's a decidedly unnatural movement to do all the time. Large numbers of ballet dancers end their careers with arthritic hips and sciatica due to this overemphasis of a tucked pelvis. So constantly arching the spine is unhealthy, and constantly tucking the spine is unhealthy. So it's just interesting to be aware of this. So if you're doing that, you're not going to manage to engage your core as well. So the scooping the tailbone isn't necessarily a good cue to use. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. So there's conflicting points of view of overarching the lower back as well, having the ribs forward. Okay, so the rib cage puffing forwards is what most teachers' eyes see first. So they say soften your front ribs and attempt to get students to drop the front of their rib cage towards the pelvis. But the change actually comes from the front of the pelvis, the hips. So to fix overarched lower backs and pointy, puffy lower ribs, students have to posteriorly tilt their pelvis at the hip joint, bringing their pelvis and their lower back into neutral alignment. So that reduces the lower back's arch and shortens the front body and drops the ribs down. So there you go. So that is a slight tilt on the pelvis, but it's just knowing when to cue it. So, you know, some people, like most people, have a forward tilting pelvis. So it's also called an anterior pelvic tilt. So it needs to be brought back to neutral with a posterior tilt or tuck. But the anatomical truth is the overwhelming majority of us present with a pelvis which is actually tucked under. So in addition to having a tucked pelvis, most people present with a forward translation of the rib cage, also called rib thrust. So when your rib cages move forward, it creates an overly arched spine. So it's just looking at how people are, everyone is different, and their natural way of their bodies, how they are. So this softening your front ribs is maybe not the greatest cue. So here's some options and ideas for what you could say to your students. Lengthen the spine. Draw your lower ribs in or your front ribs back. You can align the back of your head with the back of the pelvis, or you can ask them, what part of your body seems to be supporting you right now? Where do you feel tension? How does your lower back feel? And how does your neck and your face feel? So there's so many different cues for so many different postures, but it's just about being aware of how you word things, because everyone takes things in differently as well. So aligning the cervical spine in the head as well. So the back of the head in line with the back of the pelvis is a good one for in poses like Tadasana, downward facing dog, and for setting up like back bends and forward bends and twists. Okay. I always think as well, a slight tuck of the chin to help the cervical spine keep in line with the spine. It actually stops from the tantric yoga perspective. It stops the prana from shooting too quickly up Sushumna and agitating the brain. You're trying to keep that slight Jalandhar Bandha will stop your brain from getting overwhelmed with prana. Really, that's the thing. So so I think I'm not going to go too, like, we've spoken about cueing, we've spoken about how to teach in that sort of sense. Let's look at wise practice now. So wise practice is really about teaching in different ways and practicing postures for a purpose. So you guys have heard me speak about Angabanga sadhana, which is you practice what you feel like doing, what you like doing isn't necessarily so good for you. This is wise practice, of the fact that you want to practice Sarvanga sadhana, which is supported practice. So there's core teachings that have been passed down from teacher to student for many years, spreading through the majority of lineages and styles. And there's many teachings that have said in many ways by many teachers for many years, because they're foundational to the practice of yoga. So it doesn't matter how deep into a posture you go. What does matter is who you are when you get there. Okay, I think that's quite a nice saying. That was Max Strom said that. So asana does serve a purpose, but it's simply not to be better at asana. Okay, so individual students will find different practices challenging. So it might be releasing into a back bend or softening into a forward bend, lifting off into an arm balance, respecting their limitations, or sitting still. So practice provides the opportunity to observe. Okay, so it helps you to try different strategies, and it helps you awaken. Also, you know, as I was find with, especially with yin yoga as well, it helps you to find comfort in your discomfort as well. So some bodies require more accessible postures and others require more challenging postures. Both have the same outcome. They help practitioners feel more stable, comfortable, and confident in their own skin. So basic postures and challenging postures have largely similar effects. different people can access the same experiences through different postures relative to their individual situation. So when you embrace the difficult elements of a pose, you will improve your ability to practice ekagrata, or one-pointed focus. So in progression of practice, you might speak to these topics. So let's have a look at, it's called, it's really about trying to, the characteristics and the efforts that lead to progress in your practice. Okay, I'm going to number them here. So you might speak to these topics one at a time over a series of classes with your students, if you like. Sincerity, humility, discernment, integrity, detachment, and security. So let's look at them and strip them down. So there are 5 requirements for a yoga student's progress. And as a student, your job is to provide 1, 2, 4, and 5. As your teachers, the job is to provide 3 and to live all 5. Okay, so let's look at this from 1 to 5, this progressing in practice. Number 1, this is sincerity. So this is your urge to grow. Number 2, this is humility. This is your willingness to change. Number 3, discernment. So this is appropriate and truthful guidance. Number 4, integrity. So this is your consistent effort. And number 5, patience. So this is detachment and serenity. So found out that I like to hear it from different people's perspectives, and I really like that concept of progressing in your practice. And it's not just about progressing in asana. This is about progressing the big picture, evolving in your practices, meditation as well. So teachers and students are advised to prioritize a consistent practice over a complete one. So it's nearly universal among experienced yoga meditation practitioners to express it's daily consistency that brings the fruits of practice. So we might encourage students to exchange a weekly 2-hour practice for a daily practice of 5 minutes or more. So we can remind students that some situations will call for legs up the wall, shavasana, and a seated meditation as their practice. And at other times, a few sun salutations, back bends, and restorative might be more effective. So consider suggesting students create an intentional space. So designating a corner of the room in their house, or, so I've got my little alternative thing. So that's going to help you to be more accountable for your devotional and your physical practice. So it's possible and it's advisable to maintain practice routines during travel. So bringing a personal item as photo, essential oil, incense can help us refresh the senses and provide a sense of consistency among the changes of travel. Whenever I go abroad, I used to bring a yoga mat. Now I don't even bring a yoga mat when I go abroad. I still practice. Do you really need a yoga mat to practice? No, I'll if it's something to do with knees, put your towel down. Any time I go abroad, it's the last time I went abroad, which was a long time ago, 2019, I went to Turkey, my boyfriend, and you would think, oh yeah, like you're having a break, but having a break isn't having a break from yoga. So every morning, it was quite good because he didn't complain. He lay in the bed and watched rubbish on TV like men do when you go on holiday. And I went out to the balcony every day, every morning, did my practices, and it's non-negotiable. When my kids were little, yeah, we'd go on holiday. And that when they had their siesta, their afternoon nap, yeah, they would, "Oh, I don't want to sleep, mummy." I'd be like, "You're not sleeping, you're just having a rest. You're allowed to stay up later on at night." So they always fell asleep. And then I would do my practices, do my readings, do my meditation, and I was set up able to deal with stuff. Because if you're not used to, if you go on holiday with people, you're not used to being in their personal space. They're not used to being in your personal space for that length of time. You're used to your own freedom. So making sure you have devoted time to your practice. You don't need all the gear. You don't need your yoga kit. You can practice yoga without wearing a yoga kit, without having a yoga mat. It's people will find excuses for not being able to practice. Oh, I've just got a delivery. Bear with me, guys. Thank you. Woo-hoo. Sorry. Monday delivery. Yeah, so I think that's important to say as a teacher. And this is I love this story. I don't know if I've shared this with you guys before. The story of the fox and the cat. So this is a good one for yoga teachers, and for there's a lot of people that would like to let you know that they know so much because they've read the scriptures and stuff like that. And it's really, how Iyengar says it's 99% practice, 1% theory. This fox and the cat story is good. So the fox and the cat, they were friends and they lived in the forest. And one day they were discussing different ways in which they could escape danger. The cat said, "I know of only one way, and that's to climb up a tree. How many ways of saving yourself do you know?" And the fox said, "Oh, I have many techniques." And he produced a book describing them throughout numerous pages. So while they were talking, a dog came to chase them. And the cat quickly jumped up the tree and was safe. Well, the fox had to search through pages and pages of his book to know which technique to follow. So it's not too difficult to guess what happened to the fox. So the moral of the story is that it's good to know a little and to practice it, rather than to know a lot and never put it into action. Practice regularly, and this is the only certain way to achieve success. I think that's quite you do get a lot of people that think they know a lot because they've read a lot of books, but I really do think what you read, you need to practice. So the principles that are learned in a class can be taken off the mat. So once you experience the difference between tension and relaxation, you can relax in the moment. So sometimes you need to only remind yourself to breathe and let go. And sometimes you can actually do an asana right where you are. So over time, you can experience the benefits of your practice off the mat, as you guys already know. And you want to utilize the yogic philosophy, including the key teachings of santosha, contentment, and Ishvara pranidhana, surrender or detaching from the results. So when traveling in particular, as I've said, to travel, I'm not allowed to yet because Levi's getting married soon. If I went away and then got stuck abroad, she'd never forgive me. I'm not even allowed. I'm meant to be going to this festival where it's Sister Sledge. It's an old person's festival, and and it's a week before the wedding. She doesn't want me to go in case I get COVID, so I'm going to wait and see. Anyway, when traveling in particular, the tendency is to feel ungrounded. This is like when Vata gets really unbalanced, and you really need to get practice of a Vata balancing practice. If you practicing tantric hatha yoga, the moon practice when you're abroad, definitely you don't want to be throwing your body in loads of different shapes and fire practices and burning yourself out. So staying grounded away from home really comes down to being mindful and centered regardless of your changing environments, your time zones and meal plans. So finding a relationship between your brain, body, and breath that disconnects you from your past and future, but aligns your energy in the present. When you're grounded, you breathe well, you digest well, and you concentrate on the present well as well. Okay, so I think we've spoken. What else do I want to show you? Yeah, I think what we're going to do is have a little break so you can get some cuppies in, get some caffeine in if you want. Then we'll come back and then we're going to speak about seasonal yoga. And we'll go into that, and then I've got so much information that I'm going to put into your group that you could read and use for your classes as well. I think it's handier to have that. You can go back to, you can go, oh, it's autumn, I can use the autumn one. Oh, it's the spring one. Or Beltane, what can I do for that? It's just to help you with theming and practicing like that. Okay, I'll put the recording off.